Sarah had lost everything the night her 5-year-old daughter Emma vanished from home. 3 years had passed since that October evening when Sarah came home from her nursing shift to find Emma's bed empty, the window open, and her little girl gone forever. The police searched for months, neighbors formed search parties, the FBI opened a case file. But Emma had simply disappeared, as if she'd never existed at all. The loss destroyed Sarah's marriage. David couldn't bear to look at her anymore, couldn't stand the way she obsessively checked Emma's room every night, hoping somehow their daughter had returned. The divorce was finalized 18 months ago. The loss nearly destroyed Sarah too. She'd stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped believing in anything good. 6 months after Emma's disappearance, Sarah had stood on the Riverside Bridge at 3 a.m, ready to jump. That's when Pastor David Williams found her. He'd been driving home from the hospital after visiting a sick parishioner when he spotted Sarah on the bridge. He'd talked her down gently, patiently, sitting with her on the cold concrete until dawn. He'd driven her home, made her coffee, and prayed with her until the darkness lifted just enough for her to breathe again. "God isn't finished with you yet," he'd told her. "Emma's loss has a purpose we can't see, but you're still here for a reason." Pastor Williams had saved her life that night. Over the following months, he'd helped her find purpose again, offering her work as church secretary when no hospital would hire her anymore. The medication made her shaky, unreliable, but Pastor Williams saw past her brokenness to something still worth saving. Now, 3 years after losing Emma, Sarah finally felt something like peace. She had her small apartment, her work at Riverside Community Church, and the gentle guidance of the man who'd pulled her back from the edge. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was enough. Until this Tuesday morning, when everything changed. Sarah was organizing Pastor Williams's office, preparing for the weekly staff meeting, when she opened his desk drawer looking for staples. Her fingers touched something cold and metallic. She pulled out a small silver bracelet with a heart-shaped charm. Emma's bracelet. The one Sarah had fastened around her daughter's wrist the night she disappeared. Sarah's hands began shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. She knew every detail of this jewelry, had bought it for Emma's 5th birthday just 2 months before the disappearance. Emma had been wearing it that final night, had held up her little arm to show Sarah how pretty it looked in the lamplight. The bracelet's clasp was broken now, snapped cleanly as if torn off with force. "Sarah?" Pastor Williams's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, his kind face creased with concern. "Is everything all right?" She held up the bracelet with trembling fingers. "This is Emma's. How? Why do you have this?" Pastor Williams set down his coffee and moved closer, his expression shifting to gentle understanding. "Oh, sweetheart, you brought that to one of our counseling sessions months ago. You were holding it, talking about missing Emma. When you left, I found it on the chair. I kept meaning to return it to you." The explanation made sense. Sarah's memory had been unreliable since starting her new medication. The fog of grief and antidepressants could certainly cause memory lapses. She did sometimes bring Emma's belongings to their sessions, finding comfort in touching things her daughter had once worn. "Of course," Sarah managed, her voice small. "I'm sorry, I just... for a moment..." "No need to apologize." Pastor Williams's voice carried infinite patience. "Grief plays tricks on all of us. That's why we lean on faith, to anchor us when our own minds betray us." Sarah nodded, slipping the bracelet into her purse. But as Pastor Williams moved to his desk, something nagged at her. The broken clasp. She remembered Emma's bracelet being perfect that last night. She'd fastened it herself, checked to make sure it was secure. When had it broken? And if she'd brought it to a counseling session, why couldn't she remember? That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment staring at the bracelet. The more she examined it, the more certain she became that something was wrong. The break in the clasp was clean, sharp, not the gradual wear of an old piece of jewelry, but the kind of break that happened when someone pulled hard and fast. She called her ex-husband David, something she rarely did anymore. Sarah? David's voice carried surprise. Their conversations since the divorce had been brief and painful. What's wrong? David, do you remember Emma's silver bracelet? The one with the heart charm? A long pause. Yes. The one she was wearing when... He couldn't finish the sentence. Was it broken when the police searched her room? Did they ever find it? No, Sarah. They never found any of her jewelry. You know that. His voice grew gentler. Why are you asking? Sarah stared at the broken bracelet, her mind racing. If the police had never found it, if it had disappeared with Emma that night, how had it ended up in Pastor Williams's desk drawer? I thought I saw one like it today, she lied. Never mind, it's probably nothing. But after hanging up, Sarah knew it was everything. The next morning, she arrived early at Riverside Community Church. Pastor Williams often came in around 7 for his morning prayers, giving her time to think. As she unlocked his office, her eyes went immediately to his desk. The locked bottom drawer had always puzzled her. When she'd asked about it during her first week, Pastor Williams had explained it contained confidential counseling records. But now, Sarah noticed details she'd missed before. The lock was new, recently installed. The wood around it showed fresh scratches, as if it was opened frequently. What kind of counseling records needed such security? Finding everything you need? Sarah spun around, heart hammering. Pastor Williams stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Just getting an early start, she managed. He moved to his desk, settling into his chair. Sarah, I've been thinking about yesterday. Finding Emma's bracelet must have brought back difficult memories. A few, she admitted. Sometimes objects surface when we need them most. Perhaps this is God's way of helping you take another step forward in your healing. His words should have been comforting. Pastor Williams had said similar things hundreds of times over the past 3 years, always knowing exactly what she needed to hear. But something in his tone felt different now, rehearsed, like a performance he'd given before. Pastor Williams, Sarah said carefully, I don't remember bringing Emma's bracelet to counseling. I don't remember taking it off in your office. He studied her face for a long moment. Memory is fragile, especially when we're processing trauma. The mind protects us by hiding painful moments. But I remember everything else about our sessions. I remember every conversation we've had about Emma. Do you? He leaned back in his chair. Or do you remember what your mind allows you to remember? The question sent chills down Sarah's spine. Was he suggesting her memories were unreliable? Or was he suggesting something darker, that her memories had been deliberately altered? I should get back to work, Sarah said, standing quickly. Of course, but Sarah... Pastor Williams's voice stopped her at the door. If you're having concerns about your memory, about reality, we should discuss adjusting your medication. Dr. Morrison mentioned that grief-related psychosis can develop years after the initial trauma. Grief-related psychosis. The phrase hit Sarah like a physical blow. Was that what this was? Was she losing her mind, seeing sinister explanations for innocent coincidences? But as she returned to her desk, one thought kept circling through her mind. How did Pastor Williams know she was having concerns about reality? She hadn't mentioned any confusion beyond the bracelet. Unless he'd been watching for signs of suspicion, preparing for this exact conversation. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah began to wonder if the man who'd saved her life might be hiding something darker than she'd ever imagined. That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that would have terrified her just days earlier. She drove to the public library and asked for access to their newspaper archives. Her investigative instincts, dormant since Emma's disappearance, were slowly awakening. She started with Emma's case, reading through months of coverage she'd been too devastated to follow at the time. The details were all familiar: the open window, the lack of evidence, the community's rallying support. But one detail jumped out at her now. In a photo from Emma's memorial service, Taken just 2 weeks after the disappearance, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Pastor Williams stood near the back of the church, his head bowed in prayer. The caption identified him as local minister offering interfaith support. But Pastor Williams had told her they'd first met 6 months later, on the bridge. He'd claimed he'd never heard of her family before that night. Sarah's hands trembled as she printed the photo. Why would he lie about when they'd first met? What reason could he have for hiding his presence at Emma's memorial? She expanded her search, looking for other mentions of Pastor Williams in connection with missing children cases. What she found made her stomach turn. Over the past 5 years, 3 children from neighboring communities had disappeared. All were young girls, all vanished from their bedrooms at night. And in each case, Pastor Williams had appeared in news coverage, offering counseling to the families, leading prayer vigils, providing interfaith support during the investigations. The pattern could be coincidental. Child disappearances unfortunately occurred throughout the region, and ministers often reached out during community tragedies. But the timing felt too precise, too calculated. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Pastor Williams. "You left early today. I hope you're feeling better. Remember, my door is always open if you need to talk." The message that once would have comforted her now felt invasive. How did he know exactly when she'd left? Had he been watching for her departure? That evening, Sarah did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled out Emma's memory box. Inside were the last remnants of her daughter's short life, favorite toys, drawings from preschool, the little cassette recorder they'd bought for her 5th birthday. Sarah had forgotten about the recorder entirely. Emma had loved making little shows with it, pretending to be a radio DJ or interviewing her stuffed animals. Sarah inserted fresh batteries, hoping for some trace of her daughter's voice. Static filled the room, then Emma's bright giggle. "Testing, testing. This is Emma Marie Chen, and I'm going to tell you about my special friend." Sarah's heart clenched. She hadn't heard Emma's voice in 3 years. "His name is Pastor Williams," Emma continued, "and he's teaching me really important games. He says they're secret games just for special girls like me. He says if I get really good at the games, something amazing will happen." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The recording was dated 1 week before Emma's disappearance. "Pastor Williams says Mummy might not understand the games at first, because grown-ups sometimes forget how to play, but he's going to help Mummy learn too. He says God has a special plan for our family, and the games are part of it." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm not supposed to tell anyone about the games yet, but I wanted to practice telling you, Mummy. Pastor Williams says you're going to be so proud of me when you see how well I can play." The recording crackled with static, then continued. "He taught me the quiet game today. I have to be very, very still and not make any sounds, even if I'm scared. He says it's practice for when we go on our special trip together." Sarah dropped the recorder, her entire body shaking. Pastor Williams had been grooming Emma weeks before her disappearance. He'd been preparing her, teaching her to cooperate, to trust him over her own mother. And he'd planned it all along. But the horror went deeper than Sarah initially realized. The recording proved that Pastor Williams's rescue of her on the bridge had been calculated too. He'd taken Emma, then positioned himself to save her devastated mother. He'd created her desperation, then exploited her gratitude. Sarah's grief transformed into something harder, more dangerous. The broken woman Pastor Williams had found 3 years ago was gone. In her place sat someone who understood exactly what kind of monster she'd been serving. But she needed more evidence. Emma's recording might not be enough. A defense attorney could claim it was childhood fantasy, innocent play misinterpreted by a grieving mother. Sarah needed proof that would destroy Pastor Williams completely. The next morning, Sarah called in sick and drove to the church. Her keys still worked, and she moved carefully through the empty building. In Pastor Williams's office, she photographed everything: appointment books, financial records, contact information for other staff members. The locked drawer remained tantalizing out of reach, but Sarah noticed something else. a filing cabinet in the corner, one she'd never seen opened. She tried the drawers and found them unlocked. Inside were files on church families, but these weren't normal administrative records. Each folder contained detailed notes about family dynamics, children's schedules, parents' work patterns, detailed psychological assessments. The information was far too personal, too invasive for legitimate church purposes. Emma's file was thick. It documented her preschool schedule, her favorite playground, her bedtime routine. Pastor Williams had noted her personality traits: trusting, eager to please authority figures, responds well to praise and special attention, mother works night shifts, extended periods of father-only supervision. The clinical nature of the observations made Sarah sick. Pastor Williams had been studying Emma like a predator studies prey, noting her vulnerabilities and opportunities for access. Other files contained similar assessments. Sarah recognized some names, families whose children had died in accidents or moved away suddenly, whose mothers had subsequently joined the church staff in various capacities. The pattern was becoming clear. A sound from upstairs made Sarah freeze. Footsteps. Pastor Williams had arrived early. She quickly photographed the files and returned them to their places. But as she moved toward the back exit, she heard voices. Multiple people, not just Pastor Williams. Through a window, she saw several cars in the parking lot. Sarah hid in the supply closet and listened as the voices moved through the building. She recognized Pastor Williams, but the others were unfamiliar. They were talking about someone called the Martinez situation. Rosa has integrated well, Pastor Williams was saying. She's particularly grateful for our support during Miguel's accident. Sarah remembered the Martinez family. Their 8-year-old son had drowned during a church camping trip 6 months ago. Rosa Martinez now worked in the church nursery, another grieving mother who'd found solace in Pastor Williams's guidance. "What about the Chen woman?" another voice asked. "She's been asking questions." "Sarah's emotional state has been fragile lately," Pastor Williams replied calmly. "I may need to recommend increased medication, perhaps a brief hospitalization, for her own safety." The casual way he discussed manipulating her treatment plan made Sarah's skin crawl. These men were talking about her like she was a problem to be managed, not a person deserving truth. "The new prospect in Beaverton looks promising," a third voice added. "Single mother, recently divorced, daughter fits the profile perfectly." "Excellent," Pastor Williams said. "Remember, patience is key. We plant seeds of dependence slowly. The mothers must believe they're being rescued, not recruited." Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle her shocked gasp. This wasn't just about Emma, it was an organized network. Pastor Williams had perfected a system for targeting vulnerable families, taking their children, then exploiting the mother's desperation to create a collection of grateful, dependent servants. How many children had he taken? How many mothers had he rescued, just as he'd rescued her? The voices faded as the men moved to another part of the building. Sarah waited until she heard car doors slamming before creeping out of the closet. She needed to escape, but more importantly, she needed a plan, because now she understood the full scope of what she was facing. Pastor Williams wasn't just a predator, he was the leader of an organized conspiracy, and she was trapped inside it, surrounded by people who saw her as either an asset to be managed or a threat to be eliminated. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, her mind racing. She had evidence, but who could she trust? Pastor Williams controlled her medical care, her employment, her entire support system. The police might dismiss her as a mentally unstable woman creating paranoid fantasies, exactly on what Pastor Williams would claim if she tried to expose him. She needed to make him confess, on tape, in his own words. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work looking disheveled and shaky. Pastor Williams noticed immediately. "Sarah, you look unwell. Have you been taking your medication?" She shook her head, allowing tears to flow. "I can't stop thinking about Emma. I keep hearing her voice everywhere. Last night I thought I heard her calling to me." Pastor Williams's expression shifted to careful concern. "Auditory hallucinations can be a sign that we need
to adjust your treatment. Perhaps it's time to consider more intensive therapy.
I found something, Sarah whispered, pulling out Emma's cassette recorder. I think Emma left me a message before she went away.
Pastor Williams went very still. What kind of message?
Sarah played a portion of the recording, Emma talking about her special friend and the secret games. She watched Pastor Williams's face carefully, saw the moment his mask slipped and calculation replaced concern. That's very concerning, Sarah. Children's imaginations can seem real when we're processing grief, but this sounds like fantasy play. But what if it's not? Sarah pressed. What if Emma was trying to tell me something important? What if she knew something was going to happen to her? Sarah, Pastor Williams stood and moved closer. I'm very worried about your mental state. These delusions could become dangerous, to yourself and potentially to others. I think we need to discuss immediate hospitalization. You think I'm losing my mind?
I think you're suffering tremendously, and sometimes people in extreme pain create elaborate explanations to make sense of senseless tragedies.
Sarah let herself break down completely, sobbing into her hands. Through her fingers, she watched Pastor Williams relax, satisfied that his broken bird was still properly caged. But hidden in her purse, a small recording device captured every word. I'm scared, Sarah whispered. I don't know what's real anymore. That's exactly why you need professional help, Pastor Williams said, his voice gentle and poisonous. The good news is that Dr. Morrison has a colleague who specializes in cases like yours. Women who've experienced traumatic losses sometimes develop these kinds of elaborate delusions. What kind of delusions?
The belief that their children's disappearances were part of some conspiracy. That ordinary coincidences have sinister meanings. That people they trust are somehow involved in their tragedies.
Sarah looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. Is that what I'm doing? I believe so, but with proper treatment we can help you distinguish between reality and the stories your grief has created. Pastor Williams leaned back in his chair, completely confident in his control. Sometimes the truth is simpler than we want to accept. Emma wandered away that night, perhaps sleepwalking or drawn by some sound. These things happen even to the most careful parents. So it was my fault. Fault is a destructive concept. What matters is healing, moving forward, finding new purpose. His smile was warm and cold at the same time. You've done such good work here, Sarah. You've helped this ministry in ways you can't even imagine. That's your true calling, not dwelling on tragedies you can't change. The casual dismissal of Emma's life, the complete fabrication of her disappearance, made Sarah's blood boil. But she kept her voice steady, playing the broken victim perfectly. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help, separating reality from whatever my mind has created.
I'm glad you're being realistic about your condition. Dr. Morrison can arrange everything. A few weeks of intensive therapy, proper medication adjustment, and you'll feel much better. Sarah nodded meekly. When would this happen?
Soon, very soon. In the meantime, I want you to rest. Don't worry about work. Don't worry about anything except getting well. As Pastor Williams spoke about treatment plans and doctor consultations, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: perfect clarity. The fog of medication and manipulation was lifting, revealing the truth in sharp detail. Pastor Williams hadn't saved her. He'd created her desperation, then exploited it. He'd taken Emma, shattered Sarah's life, then positioned himself as her rescuer. Every kindness had been calculated, every gesture of support designed to increase her dependence. And now, when she was finally beginning to see through his lies, he was planning to have her committed, locked away where no one would believe her accusations, drugged into compliance, silenced forever. But Pastor Williams had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman Emma's disappearance had forged underneath all that grateful vulnerability. The investigative journalist who'd once exposed corruption wasn't dead. She'd just been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up. That night, Sarah made copies of everything: The photographs, Emma's recording, the evidence she'd gathered about Pastor Williams's network. She mailed packages to the FBI, state police, and a former colleague at the Seattle Times. In each package, she included a letter explaining her discoveries and her fears about what might happen to her. Then she prepared for the most dangerous performance of her life. The next morning, Sarah arrived at church carrying the hidden recording device. She would make Pastor Williams confess everything, in his own words, on tape. "Pastor Williams," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about hospitalization. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need more intensive help." His smile was warm and predatory. "I'm glad you're being realistic, Sarah. Dr. Morrison's colleague has experience with complicated grief cases, women who develop elaborate fantasies to cope with unbearable losses." "Is that what I've done? Created fantasies?" "I believe so. This idea that Emma's recording contains some kind of coded message that her disappearance was planned rather than accidental. These are signs of a mind trying to impose order on chaos." Sarah leaned forward. "But the recording is real. Emma really did mention someone named Pastor Williams." Children often create imaginary friends, especially when they're processing difficult emotions. Emma may have been anxious about something, a nightmare, a scary movie, and created a comforting authority figure to help her feel safe. The smooth way he dismissed Emma's terror, reframing her abduction as childhood fantasy, made Sarah sick. But she pressed on. "So you think Emma just wandered away? That no one took her?"
I think Emma was a curious 5-year-old who heard something outside her window and went to investigate. The world is full of dangers for children who venture out alone at night.
"What kind of dangers?" Pastor Williams leaned back, completely comfortable with his lies. "Wild animals, open water, simple accidents that become tragedies. Sometimes the most devastating events have the most ordinary explanations." Sarah's recording device captured every word as Pastor Williams constructed an elaborate fiction about Emma's disappearance. But she needed him to go further to reveal the truth about his network. "Pastor Williams, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "How did you know to find me on the bridge that night? It seems like such a coincidence that you'd be driving by at exactly the right moment." For the first time, Pastor Williams hesitated. "I told you I was returning from the hospital."
Yes, but which hospital? And which patient? I don't recall the specific details. It was 3 years ago, Sarah.
"It's just that I've been thinking about that night a lot lately. About how lucky I was that you happened to be there. About how you seemed to know exactly what to say to talk me down." Sarah's voice remained innocent, curious. "Have you helped other people in similar situations?" Pastor Williams's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "Other mothers who've lost children? Other families dealing with tragedies? You seem to have a gift for finding people when they need help most. Ministry calls us to serve those in crisis."
Like Rosa Martinez, after Miguel's accident?
Something flickered across Pastor Williams's face. Rosa needed spiritual guidance during a difficult time. And the Harrison family? After their daughter's car accident?
Sarah, why are you asking these questions?
She could see him calculating, evaluating, deciding how much of a threat she represented. Sarah kept her voice small, broken. "I just want to understand how God works through you, how you always seem to be there when families need you most. God places us where we need to be."
Even before the tragedies happen?
The question hung in the air between them. Pastor Williams studied her face, and Sarah saw the exact moment he realized what she was really asking. "Sarah, you're not well. These questions suggest you're developing paranoid thoughts about people who've tried to help you." "I'm not paranoid. I'm just trying to understand." "Understand what?"
Sarah met his eyes directly. "How you always know exactly when and where to find broken mothers who need saving?"
Pastor Williams stood slowly. "This conversation is over. I'm calling Dr. Morrison immediately." You need immediate psychiatric intervention. Before you do that, Sarah said, pulling out her phone, let me share something with you. She played Emma's recording again, but this time she included the portion she'd held back. Emma's voice saying, Pastor Williams promised Mommy will understand soon. He said God has a special plan for our whole family. Pastor Williams went white. Where did you get that? From Emma's cassette recorder, the same recorder that captured your voice in the background, coaching her about the special games you taught her. That proves nothing. You could have created that recording yourself during one of your episodes. Could I have created this too? Sarah pulled out the photograph from Emma's memorial service, pointing to Pastor Williams in the crowd. You told me we met for the first time on the bridge. But here you are at Emma's memorial, 2 weeks after she disappeared. 6 months before you found me. Pastor Williams stared at the photograph, his careful facade cracking. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Sarah? Then explain it to me. Explain how you always arrive at exactly the right moment to rescue grieving mothers. Explain how you knew about Emma before you ever met me. Explain why my daughter's bracelet was hidden in your desk.
You're having a psychotic break, Pastor Williams said, but his voice lacked conviction.
I'm having clarity for the first time in 3 years. Sarah stood, no longer the broken woman he'd manipulated. You didn't save me, Pastor Williams. You destroyed me. You took my daughter, shattered my life, then positioned yourself as my rescuer. Pastor Williams moved toward the door, but Sarah wasn't finished. How many others are there? How many children have you taken? How many mothers have you collected?
You have no idea what you've done, Pastor Williams snarled, his gentle mask completely gone. No idea who you're threatening or how deep this goes. Then tell me.
You want the truth? His voice turned cold, vicious. Emma is gone, Sarah. She's been gone for 3 years. And if you don't stop this investigation immediately, you'll join her. The threat was everything Sarah needed. She smiled for the first time in years. Too late, I already have. At that moment, the church's front doors burst open. Detective Morrison entered with 6 officers, weapons drawn. David Williams, you're under arrest for conspiracy, child abduction, and witness intimidation. Pastor Williams spun toward the officers, his expression shifting back to wounded innocence. Officers, thank God you're here. This woman is having a severe psychiatric episode. She's been making increasingly dangerous accusations. Step away from Mrs. Chen Martinez, Detective Morrison ordered. We've been monitoring this conversation through her recording device. We heard your confession. Sarah had contacted the FBI after leaving the packages, working with them to set up this final confrontation. Pastor Williams's threats, his admission about Emma's fate, his network of accomplices, all of it had been recorded and witnessed. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Pastor Williams looked directly at Sarah. You think this ends with me? This network spans multiple states, multiple organizations. You've just signed your own death warrant. Maybe, Sarah said quietly, but at least Emma will have justice. The search of the church took hours. In the basement, behind a false wall that had been expertly constructed, officers found a small room fitted with soundproofing, recording equipment, and evidence of long-term habitation. They found children's clothes, toys, and videotapes that would provide evidence of unimaginable crimes. But they didn't find Emma. Williams might have moved her when he sensed you were getting suspicious, Detective Morrison told Sarah gently. We're searching every property connected to him and his associates. Sarah nodded, but part of her had already begun grieving again. 3 years was a long time. Even if Emma was alive, what had been done to her? What would be left of the bright, curious child Sarah remembered? The arrests continued through the evening. Dr. Morrison, 2 other church board members, and 5 men from the morning meeting were taken into custody. The network Pastor Williams had built was larger than Sarah had imagined, reaching into multiple communities across the region. At the police station, Sarah gave her statement. Hours of testimony, every detail she could remember from the past 3 years. The manipulation, the medication designed to keep her compliant, the careful isolation from anyone who might support her investigation. "You did something incredibly brave," Detective Morrison said as they finished, "and incredibly dangerous. If we hadn't been monitoring that conversation—" "He would have killed me," Sarah said simply, "just like he killed Emma." But even as she spoke the words, something nagged at her. Pastor Williams' final threat, his certainty that this went deeper than one man. What if Emma wasn't dead? What if she was part of something larger, something more organized than even Sarah had discovered? 2 days later, Detective Morrison called with news that changed everything. "Sarah, we found a property in the mountains registered under a fake name, but connected to Williams through financial records. It's isolated, off-grid, but there are signs of recent activity. We're going in tonight." Sarah's heart stopped. "Do you think—" "I think there's a chance. A real chance." 4 hours later, Sarah sat in a police van, watching through bulletproof windows as tactical officers surrounded a remote cabin. The operation moved with precision, flash grenades, shouted commands, officers flooding through every entrance. Then Detective Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "We've got her! We have Emma Chen Martinez. She's alive." Sarah collapsed against the van's wall, 3 years of grief pouring out in sobs that shook her entire body. Alive. Against all odds, Emma was alive. The reunion took place at the hospital. Emma was 8 now, thin and pale, but physically unharmed. She looked at Sarah with confusion and fear, pressing herself against the far wall of the hospital room. "I don't know you," Emma whispered. "Pastor Williams said my family was dead. He said everyone was dead except us." Sarah's heart broke all over again. 3 years of lies, manipulation, isolation. Her daughter had been turned into a stranger, taught to fear the very person who loved her most. "I'm your mother," Sarah said gently, staying across the room to avoid frightening Emma further. "Your name is Emma Chen Martinez. You disappeared when you were 5 years old. I've been looking for you every day since then." Emma shook her head violently. "Number Pastor Williams said people would come and tell lies, try to confuse me. He said they'd pretend to be my family, but they're really here to hurt me." The social worker explained that reunification would take time, that Emma had been psychologically conditioned to distrust everyone except her captor. There would be months, possibly years of therapy ahead, but she was alive. Sarah clung to that impossible fact. Emma was alive, and they would find their way back to each other. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a congressional committee investigating child trafficking networks. Her testimony, combined with evidence from Pastor Williams' operation, had exposed a conspiracy spanning 12 states and involving over 40 perpetrators. Emma was making progress in therapy, slowly learning to trust again. They lived in a new city now under assumed names for their protection. The network Pastor Williams had threatened was real, and some members remained at large. But Sarah was no longer the broken woman who'd been so easy to manipulate. She'd founded a non-profit organization dedicated to helping families recover from similar crimes. Her work had helped rescue 23 children and prosecute 51 traffickers. "The most insidious aspect of these crimes," Sarah testified, "isn't just the kidnapping, it's the systematic destruction of the victim's ability to trust, even their own family. These perpetrators don't just steal children, they steal their capacity to believe in love, safety, or protection." The committee chairman leaned forward. "What would you say to other parents who might be facing similar situations?" Sarah thought of Emma, slowly learning to laugh again, still afraid of basements and locked doors, but growing stronger every day. "I'd say that love is more powerful than any lie, no matter how long those lies have been repeated. I'd say that the truth has its own weight, and eventually everything else falls away. And I'd say that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who deserve our trust least. But that doesn't mean we should stop trusting altogether." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "Most importantly, I'd say never stop looking, never stop believing, never stop fighting, because somewhere, in a place you'd never think to search, someone you love might be waiting for you to be strong enough to find them." As Sarah left the hearing room, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from grateful victim to fierce advocate, from broken servant to dangerous enemy of those who preyed on innocence. Pastor Williams had created her vulnerability, but in trying to exploit it, he'd also forged her strength. Emma was waiting at their hotel, working on homework at the small desk by the window. She looked up when Sarah entered and smiled, tentatively still, but genuine. "How did it go, Mom?" The word still sounded careful, but it was real. Sarah sat beside her daughter, offering a hug that Emma no longer flinched away from. "It went perfectly," Sarah said. "We're helping other families find their way home." Outside, the world continued its complicated dance of good and evil, trust and betrayal. But inside their small safe space, a mother and daughter who'd been torn apart by unimaginable cruelty were slowly healing together. The sacred betrayal was over, the sacred rebuilding had begun,